Hello everyone. On behalf of Control Case, I would like to welcome everyone and thank you for attending today's webinar titled Docker and Container Compliance in the Context of Amazon Web Services. My name is Satya Rane. I am the Chief Innovation Officer and Quality Assurance at Control Case. I have with me Ashish Kirtikar, who is the Senior Vice President responsible for delivering compliance as a service globally for Control Case. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Number one, after the presentation, we will have brief Q&A period. To ask the question, simply type your question in the question box on the screen below, and we will try to get to as many as we can. If you have any audio or video issues, please let us know by typing in the chat window, and our moderator will look into it to resolve the issues. Second, the recording of this webinar will be available on ControlCase controlcase.com/webinars. It will be available in a week's time from now. So as part of this webinar, we will go through brief introduction about ControlCase. Then we are going to talk more on Docker and container technologies. Just a heads up before we start, we are not going to go into details of deployment, managing, etc. of Dockers in the AWS or in general. We will, however, cover overview of what these technologies and focus only on how we can be compliant while using Docker containers in AWS. We will see what are different hosting models, and we'll take deep dive into cloud hosted container services. We will talk about the responsibilities of customer and cloud service provider. After, we will be going through compliance as a service offering from Control Case and how it can help you keeping compliant while using container services. All right. So about Control Case. Control Case's mission is to make compliance effortless and accurate. Control Case's solution provides a dashboard which helps you run your security program. We are based out of Washington DC area. We have customers globally, and we have focused exclusively on IT security, compliance, and privacy. Our objective is to ensure our customers get peace of mind with respect to their compliance requirements while they focus on their core business. Some of the credentials: we are able to certify companies or assess or provide reports on multiple regulations, including PCI, SOC, ISO, HITRUST, etc. We also have unique service offering where we can collect evidence once and certify you against multiple regulations. Okay. Now let's dive deep into Docker and container technologies. So let's first try and understand what is container. It's an operating system feature in which the kernel allows the existence of multiple isolated user space instances. It is an OS level or virtualization methodology which can be used to deploy and run applications without launching an entire virtual machine for each application. There are multiple container solutions out there in the market. However, for the scope of this webinar, we will be only focusing on Amazon Elastic Container Service and Docker technology. So let's understand the Docker and AWS ECS. Docker is an open platform for containerization and can be used to deploy containers for developers and sysadmins to build, ship, and run distributed applications. Other similar platforms include, but not limited to, Microsoft Azure Container Services, AWS ECS, Apache Mesos, and similar solutions out there. Amazon ECS is highly scalable, high performance container orchestration service to run Docker container on the AWS cloud. It launches containers in your own Amazon virtual private cloud, allowing you to use your VPC security groups and network access control list. It is deeply integrated with AWS service, including Elastic Load Balancing, VPC, IAM, CloudWatch, CloudFormation, and AWS CloudTrail. So let's look at first different hosting models. Uh, Now let's look at what these models are, and what type of models are available where. Physical client hosted model, where client will own the hardware, OS running on the systems, containerization platform, container registry or the containers. Then we have second one, where data center managed services. Uh, the data center service provider will own the hardware in this case. Client will own the OS running on the systems. Then the containerization platform, container registry, and the containers. Third one is the cloud service client hosted model, where service provider will own the hardware, client will own VM and OS running on the virtual systems, containerization platform, container registry, and the containers. The fourth one is cloud hosted container service providers, where cloud service provider will own hardware, OS or virtual based system layer, container platform, client will own the container registry and the container. With that understanding, let's now look into the AWS Docker and container compliance. So when it comes to compliance for the container, uh, basically you will see that there are various layers, and in this particular slide, a responsibility matrix has been given, where containers represent a transformational change in the way the apps are built and run. They do not necessitate dramatically new security best practices. On the contrary, most important aspects of container security are a refinement of well-established techniques and principles. And therefore, it is important while choosing model you are going to use for the containerized environments. And here comes the complexity of who owns what responsibilities with respect to various layers. The table shows compliance responsibility metrics in case of different container hosting models. And now we will look at uh, the AWS ECS and the responsibilities with respect to compliance. Here we are showing various compliance areas, right from scoping up to the documentation of policies, etc., and what's the responsibility for the customer, or where it is shared, and where the cloud service provider can take some of the responsibilities. As you can see on the slide, most of the responsibility lies with the customer. However, in case and physical security, you will see that there are shared responsibilities, or the cloud is responsible for the physical security. When it comes to network very specifically, and Amazon ECS, they provide a complete firewall solution, and this is mandatory for the inbound firewall, which is configured in a default deny mode for the AWS customer instances and Amazon EC2 as well as ECS customers. The firewall is controlled not by the host or instance itself, but requires the AWS customers uh, certificates and key to authorize changes, and thus it adds additional layer of security. AWS customers have control on the firewall rules and container layer. Therefore, they are responsible for configuring compliant rules using security groups. So with the understanding of the responsibilities and specifically speaking the AWS, let's look at uh, top 10 best practices for compliances. Uh, Traditional development practices like patching techniques and system upgrade process might not directly apply to containerized environment. Therefore, it is important to make developers aware about new secure way of developing, running, testing, and supporting applications on the containers. Use of container specific host OSs. When using a container specific host operating systems, attack surfaces are typically much smaller than they would be in general purpose hosted operating systems. So there are fewer opportunities to attack and compromise a container specific host operating system. Therefore, whenever possible, you should use container specific host operating systems to reduce their risk. At the same time, it is important to note that container specific host operating systems will still have vulnerabilities over the time that require remediation. Number three is segmenting containers by purpose, sensitivity, and threat postures provides additional defense in depth. The configuration standards which are created by your organization for container deployment must address this. By grouping containers in this manner, you make it more difficult for an attacker for compromise. And if let's say one of the group is compromised, uh, it can actually expand to the other groups also. Fourth one is where weak orchestrator configurations can expose the orchestrator and uh, all other container technologies components to increase risk, such as unauthorized host joining the cluster and running containers, or compromise of a single cluster host, implying compromise of entire cluster. For example, if the same key pairs used for authentication are shared across all nodes, it may increase the risk. uh, then another type is unencrypted and unauthenticated communications between the orchestrator and administrator host. Next is the traditional vulnerability management tools are not really sufficient for containers. Traditional tools are often unable to detect vulnerabilities within the containers, leading to the false sense of safety. You should adopt tools and processes to validate and enforce compliance with secure configuration best practices for images. This should include having centralized reporting and monitoring of the compliance state of each image and preventing not non-compliant images from being run. And in fact, Ashish is going to cover more on this in his further slides, where he's going to talk more on a compliance as a service. Next is container aware network monitoring and filtering would detect anomalous connections to other containers during the attempt to map other systems. The uses of mandatory access control capabilities can provide additional barriers to ensure that process and file system activity is still segmented within the defined boundaries. With respect to segmentation of workloads, ensure that the scope of compromise would be limited to uh, apps of a common sensitivity level that are sharing the host. For example, a compromised runtime on a host only running web apps would not impact runtime on other hosts running containers for financial apps. Ensuring that only vetted, tested, validated, and digitally signed images are allowed to be uploaded to an organization's registries. And then you should institute separate environments for development, test, and other scenarios, each with specific controls to provide role-based access control for container deployment and management activities. So after those best practices, let's look at the let's look at the yeah. So now, moving from a general sense of Docker compliance, let's get into specifics of how control case can be able to partner in helping you achieve this compliance. And I would request Ashish to cover this part of the presentation. Ashish, over to you.
Thanks, Satya. Thank you so much. I think that you have given a very, very good brief understanding of what Docker is and what is the context in which we are talking about at the moment, and what all aspects we have to keep in mind when we are looking at Docker compliance as the new technology which has come out in the market. So AWS is a unique technology, and ECS offering further adds complexities to that environment. Thus, it is creating this one of a kind challenging experience in implementing this compliance. So, as we have seen in the earlier slides, there was a matrix created for identifying the responsibilities in regards to achieving and maintaining compliance on AWS. So, control case compliance as a service solution has the capability to assist customers in achieving this compliance for specific areas. These areas include scoping, configuration management, application security, logging and monitoring, security testing, policies and procedures, risk assessment, third party management, governance and compliance, etc. Out of which policies, procedures, risk assessment, third party management are very generic and are not only specific to your specific to the AWS ECS as such, which can be generally used for multiple requirements. However, going into the specifics of each of this activity. So, looking at scoping basically CaaS solution can be configured to connect with the AWS setup and identify the instances running on the system in real time. Any start and stop of Docker images or containers on ECS framework can easily be identified. Also, documented reports can be created identifying the instances running along with their details. Of course, for this requirement, there are some standard uh, prerequisites that will be required to be provided by the customers. So, and this will include access to the private Docker registry via firewall, user account on the registry to fetch all the information in regards to what are the Docker systems or Docker instances running on it. So those kind of prerequisite requirements will certainly be there. But once we have these requirements, we will be able to on a real time basis we identify what instances are running, what Docker images are running, what in the containers, and what how they are running, what all configurations are there. So the next point you can see is configuration management. So in configuration management, the solution can be configured to be connected to the AWS setup to perform configuration checks on the ECS instances as well as the overlying services on the container images. So let me give you an example over here. So in case there is a customer who is using an image which has Tomcat installed on it, then a configuration check of this Tomcat installation can provide details about whether all necessary best practices are implemented and any misconfigurations are identified. Also, we can generate related reports and circulate to the process owners for necessary remediation. So it can be like a real time configuration check happening on these Docker systems. uh, Next is application security. Now, application security will always be the same what is being done as a part of the normal application security process, because there will be normal penetration tests run on application hosted on these Docker images. However, the applications definitely will be um, running either on web or on whatever other platforms are being used. These applications will be accessible to the end users as well as to control case team members for performing the penetration tests to identify any vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities will be reported to the process owners via the control case GRC vulnerability manager. Logging and monitoring. Now, this is a very important and very difficult subject that needs to be talked about. So, when it comes to logging and monitoring in ECS context, there will be two types of systems configured for logging. One will be the logs from the ECS instances or containers, and other will be from the overlying applications, services, or other instances. For ECS instances or containers, we can integrate the control case SIM solution with CloudWatch, which acts as AWS solution to collect logs of all tasks performed on or for the ECS instances or containers. For the overlying systems, we will have to extract the logs from the respective systems through scripts and underlying agents and move the logs to the control case SIM solution. As many of the overlying systems may not have standard log formats, control case teams will have to work towards creating plugins and parsers for the same to ensure all relevant compliance affecting events or use cases are available on the dashboard. These logs of course will be monitored, and alerts will be generated for them 24 by 7, and customers will be alerted through emails in case of there are any discrepancies or any incidents identified based on the correlations. Customers will also have access to daily reports for all compliance affecting use cases. The next point which you see is security testing. Now, in this case, control case provides two types of services in regards to the security testing. The first type is that the scans are very similar to what we call as unauthenticated scan. These scans will be conducted only at the platform level, wherein it will scan the containerization platform as well as the container network level vulnerabilities. They will not scan the software or platform level vulnerabilities inside the container image. However, there is a second type of scan which is very similar to what we call as the authenticated scans, which will happen on the container registry. This will perform at the network level as well as the software level from a vulnerability assessment perspective, wherein the container platform, the underlying containers, the container registry, everything will be reviewed, everything will be scanned, and all those vulnerabilities will be identified. However, as I mentioned earlier, the dependencies will remain, wherein the container registry of the client needs to be accessible for the control case product with the help of registry credentials and trusted certificates. One of the major issues, of course, in AWS scanning is getting approval for scanning time window from Amazon and restricting oneself to the approved scan window, because we have seen that in case we don't scan in the same scan window, then there are some issues that happen. To negate this issue, control case ensures that we use pre-approved AMIs with which scans can be run at any time without prior approval from Amazon. Then moving on to other capabilities like risk assessment, policies, and procedures, we can say that as referenced in earlier slide on best practices, a robust policy documentation backed by strong procedure are necessity for an environment like Docker's. Control case, as an organization with the experience that we have with the industry, knowledge that we have, we can assist organizations to document and devise their policies and procedures, bringing an amalgamation of the industry best practices as well as the organization's business objectives. Risk assessment, third party management, and governance activities can also be performed using a combination of the control case GRC tool and the assessor presence to guide organizations in the right direction on compliance for containers based environments. So as you can see, so as we always say that our CaaS or compliance as a service model is wherein it is a compliance in one box, single box compliance. So that's what we see over here on screen. You guys must be seeing logging, monitoring, penetration testing, VA, ASV, audit, certification, everything we can include in one single box, one single uh, answer to all your questions is control case compliance as a service. So one of the outputs and deliverables, or rather the monitoring of the outputs and deliverables from control case for all these services which I mentioned earlier, that can be done using our GRC portal. You can see the screen, and all of you are already working with control case, so you know the GRC portal which is accessible to all our customers, which will give you a current posture overall as well as in regards to every individual activity. So through this joint effort between the services provided by control case and evidence is collected for the tasks that customers are responsible for, a complete compliance dashboard can be tracked and monitored by the organization's process or business owners. So anyone from process owners to business owners who have been authorized to access the control case GRC portal, they will be able to identify which tasks have been completed, what is their status, if they are stuck somewhere, if there are any issues in any tickets, everything is accessible from our single GRC portal. So anything in regards to working on this compliance specific to containers or any other compliance requirements, everything can be worked out with our GRC portal. So that's all I had to say from a specific CaaS perspective for the container compliance. I would like to open up for question and answers here. Thank you very much for being a very patient audience. I already see questions that have come up. Uh, I'll I'll start reading one question at a time, and then we can, me and Satya can divide answers amongst us. So the first question, Satya, I think you can very well handle this one. Does control case have any recommendation or suggestions for container specific tools?
When we are talking about container specific tools, uh, the
I'm
I
sorry,
think
this question is from Mr. Chris Nelson. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention.
I may would like to know, in what aspect the tools have been asked. Like, there are various areas which you have talked, uh, right from, the registries, maintaining registries, or ensuring that the segregation of the network itself, and then the vulnerability assessment. So at various levels, various tools can be used. When it comes to control case, basically we have a stack of tools which are available as a proprietary tools from control case when it comes to our Docker technology, and through our partner network, such as just to you know um, name few, when it comes to let's say vulnerability assessment of Docker images itself. We have a tie-up with our partners where they have pre-approved AMIs into the AWS cloud, where we can use those and scan the Docker images for the vulnerabilities. And uh, similarly, for other specific areas, if the question can come as a specific area, we can answer from a tools perspective.
So I think Satya, Chris answered your question by saying that he's looking specifically for scanning Docker images in static state.
Well, in that case, I would say, we have a partner. We have partnered with Rapid7 as the vulnerability scanning tool, and that's what we use.
Um, the next question is from Kevin Belrose. The question is, do you have any recommendations on solutions to scan and certify a containerized application for compliance and vulnerabilities before being introduced to production? For example, dev to production. So, yes, Kevin. So basically, as I mentioned, the application security scanning or security penetration testing will always continue to be the same as basically from a perspective what we see today in the normal standard application security testing being carried out. And control case, as Satya mentioned, that control case, we have our own stack of solutions, as well as we have partnered with other some of our partner vendors whom we work with, majorly Rapid7, Qualys, etc., for providing these services for application security testing, and then moving on to the production setup. As a follow-up question, you have also mentioned that you stated you have a method to identify security misconfigurations. Can you provide some additional details as to how you would detect this? These are suggestions made to resolve misconfigurations as part of this service. So, Kevin, I would like to answer this one. So, for identifying security misconfigurations, one of we have our own partner solutions, and we have a stack of solutions which with which we can have we will, as I mentioned, we will require prior access to your the Docker registry, as well as a user account on the registry, to fetch image details and image information, where we a regular scan on the images will can be configured. It can be like a continuous scan, or a specific frequency based scanning that can happen, and these scans will allow uh, basically to identify what are the misconfigurations, or what are the vulnerabilities, or any issues which are identified, which can impact the security of the solution or the security of the technology which are being used. And we can provide you specific reports which will include suggestions or recommendations which would resolve the misconfigurations which are identified. I just hope that I have answered your questions. Oh, thanks for the confirmation, Kevin. Nikunj Modi has a question here. Can your GRC solution also be taken for GDPR compliance for containers? Yes, our solution, GRC solution, is available for all kind of compliance requirements, and we work across multiple compliances. We have our own questionnaires which work as a bridge between multiple compliances, because as you know that compliances such as GDPR, PCI, High Trust, HIPAA, FISMA, FISAP, etc., they have a lot of overlaps. So we have made sure that we have our questionnaires documented in a manner that all the overlaps are taken care of, and if you have the same scope with multiple certifications, you address one certification, and that same evidences, those same details, those same documentation can be used for other certifications as well, as long as the scope remains the same. So definitely you can use our GRC solution for GDPR compliance. Ankush Srivastav has a question. Do we require to perform FIM on Docker or containers? If yes, then what are the objects needed to be monitored for FIM? Does this also include application log files? Satya, would you like to take this one from a QA PCI perspective?
Yes. So the answer is yes. That not everything on that Docker image has to be really monitored. However, the security specific configuration files, and if there are any custom configuration files with respect to applications, these needs to be monitored to ensure that any integrity changes happening to the parameters which are security sensitive can be detected using the change detection mechanism or the file integrity monitoring solutions.
All right, thanks, Satya. Uh, this was the last question which has been recorded. Any more questions, gentlemen, ladies? Okay, I have one from Elswick Lai. Will this affect the scope or in scans and asset count and logging, as Dockers are completely dynamic in nature and can be altered using AWS Elastic Beanstalk service? Yes, Elswick, definitely this will affect the scope in scans and the asset count, and that is the reason that we are mostly looking at integrating the Dockers in a manner that we are monitoring them in real time, instead of like the physical setup wherein we have asset list and a list of servers, and then we do the scanning and testing and all that. Instead of that, we are looking at monitoring this in real time, so we are able to understand what are the new, if there are any new images being set up, new systems being set up, new container images being brought up, or being decommissioned. All these things are known to us in real time. So that is the reason that you can see that in the scoping part, as well as configuration management, as well as scanning, I mentioned that it would be really a prerequisite wherein we can connect to the Docker registry and have access to the systems in a manner that we are able to monitor what is happening with these Docker systems, and what is happening at the platform level as well. We still have 7 more minutes on hand, so if any further questions. All right, I don't see any more questions coming up. So I thank everyone on behalf of Control Case. Thank you very much for joining this webinar and being such a very good audience for us. And I hope that we were able to answer all the questions that came up, and we were able to provide you a bit more knowledge on compliance when it comes to Docker and AWS containers. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. Satya?
So thanks everyone for joining this. As a last reminder, the recording of this webinar will be available on Control Case's website, controlcase.com/webinars, and it will be available in a week's time from now. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.